Hello, everybody. I've got an article here from PC Gamer, the endless font of content that it is. It was posted in the suggestions for content channel of my Discord, which I need to start using more, honestly. So here we are. This one has kind of been on the to-do list, and I think it's time we give it a little look. It's not a very long article. It won't take us too long, but I think there's a few things worthy of saying here. So, this is a PC Gamer article by Wes Fenlon. By choosing not to replace Oblivion Remastered's soundtrack, Bethesda made the allegations against composer Jeremy Soule everyone else's problem. For those who don't know, particularly in terms of its relevance here, Jeremy Soule is responsible for the soundtrack for Elder Scrolls Oblivion and the Elder Scrolls Skyrim. The latter in particular, I would say, is one of, or certainly has become one of the most iconic soundtracks, I think, in gaming. And it's an excellent soundtrack. Both of them are, really, particularly the Skyrim soundtrack. In fact, I would say that the soundtrack for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is the best thing about that game. However, no matter what you think about Jeremy Soule, what he has given gaming and has given culture through his work in these very, very popular games has been quite great. Now, there's been some stuff about how he's difficult to work with. There was a Kickstarter fiasco, None of that's really important because it isn't brought up here in this article. The only thing that is mentioned regarding Jeremy Soule in this article are that there were allegations made of sexual misconduct, which were never substantiated. He was never charged with anything. Essentially, he never said anything about him, and his social media went away. And that's kind of all there is to that story. Again, at least as far as this article is concerned. The theme, already I can sense here, is the idea of separating the art from the artist. Something that we all do, and we all have our lines on where that is and isn't acceptable. I would say it's pretty easy for me to separate the art from the artist, though obviously that can't always be done. In particular with like historical figures who lived hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years ago, potentially. When we look at their work and their writings and what they've created, obviously those people lived in a completely different time with completely different cultural attitudes and values and things of that nature, so it would be very unfair of us to judge them in many ways by modern standards. Sometimes it would be totally appropriate to, but oftentimes it simply wouldn't be. But let's go through this article here by Wes Fenlon. Oblivion's soundtrack is a core part of its identity, but it's also tainted by association. It's been at least 15 years since I last touched Oblivion, but a few seconds of the triumphant theme, Reign of the Septims, brings me right back to the menu screen. And everyone knows what it is, that that very famous Oblivion song, right? Mini theme. It brings me right back to the menu screen I saw so many times on my Xbox 360, which, by the way, was the first place I played Oblivion. The gentler, almost aching harvest dawn conjures the quieter moments I spent wandering around the Imperial City, picking locks and pockets. Those are good memories, but today I have a different association with Oblivion's music. The 2019 allegations of rape and sexual misconduct against composer Jeremy Soule, who wrote the music for Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, among many other games. And remember, and I'm not saying that it necessarily must be untrue, however, they are just allegations. As far as I know, there is no evidence, there's no proof, he was never charged with anything, so we'll have to work with that going forwards. Before Bethesda announced Oblivion Remastered, there was speculation over whether the developer would remix or even fully replace Soule's music as a result of the allegations against him, or due to a conflict with Bethesda over Soule being left out of a Skyrim concert in 2016. But we now know neither happened. The soundtrack is unchanged, just as we remember it. Obviously the correct move. If they had changed the soundtrack or done any meaningful re-recording of it, that would have been a catastrophically foolish decision. Oblivion is iconic enough as a game, and in a very large part, it has to do with the Oblivion music, to the point where I would say the same thing with Skyrim as well, and certainly with Oblivion, the music of that soundtrack has been used in memes so prolifically on the internet that even if you've never played the games, you know the music. You've heard the music. You might not know that it's from Oblivion. You might not know that his music's from Skyrim, but you've heard it. You'd be able to recognize it. And obviously, when you take a game and you remaster it, remake it, do a whatever of it, the more iconic its soundtrack is, the more and more difficult it's going to be for you to get away with changing it. Some games you could probably get away with it, especially if the changes include a lot of homages to the original, or they reincorporate particular motifs and themes, but they just reuse them and reapply them. But when it comes to Oblivion, no. The soundtrack is so heavily, more than most games, it's so heavily tied to the experience that they were never going to be able to get away with changing it. It would have taken over the conversation, and one of the first mods that would exist would be to restore the original soundtrack to the remastered version. The article continues. Soul denied the allegations in 2019. In the years since, he's almost completely vanished from the internet, scrubbing official sites and social media profiles, and he seemingly hasn't composed a new soundtrack since 2019. And even before 2019, composer Anand Zur had taken the reins as the primary composer for Bethesda's RPGs, working on The Elder Scrolls Online, Fallout 4, and Starfield over the last decade. I never played Elder Scrolls Online, and I haven't played Starfield. I do remember I played a fair amount of Fallout 4, and I thought the music in that was pretty good. I'm going from memory quite a bit, but I thought the music in that was pretty good. Obviously, you do wonder if Jeremy Soule was, if these allegations didn't exist, if he was not a Kickstarter scammer, if he was a bit easier to work with, if he was the model musician, I guess you could say, what would his work have brought us? Who knows? Oblivion wouldn't be the game we remember without Soule's music, though you could argue the same for the shimmery haze of its original lighting or its charmingly ugly NPCs. Yeah, sure, I think I'd mention that. Goes without saying, practically. It wouldn't be the game that we remember without that music. The music is, it's too iconic. It has had too much time to simmer in the sort of cultural video game space, and it is so perfect for memes, partially because of the NPC behavior and some of the weird jank that makes Oblivion the game we all know and love. But it can be two things at once. Beautiful and tainted by association with its creator. A change may have been hard to get used to, but it hardly would have been unprecedented. I think that he is massively downplaying the effect that it would have if you re-released Oblivion to the degree in which they have truly remade it, right? Remastered it, redone it, and then said, you know what? The thing that so iconically beautifully coats the kind of the entirety of that whole experience, the soundtrack. Yeah, we changed it, and we made changes. I would say that and obviously there is a potential, there is potential for you to make tracks that are heavily inspired, or maybe they are simply remakes of the original music for Oblivion, and you could probably get away with that. But I think that people have a very strong connection between Oblivion's music and the Oblivion experience. I certainly do. As far as he says it would not have been unprecedented. Halo 2's Anniversary's re-recorded soundtrack replaced the tracks by Incubus and Breaking Benjamin with new compositions, although they were untouched if you switched from the updated to original graphics. I think, though, the reason for this is because of rights issues. Because it's a new company who made the Anniversary. Bungie was the one who licensed and arranged the music for Incubus and Breaking Benjamin. By the way, Halo 2 soundtrack was incredible. There was Hoobastank in there and all kinds of great, great songs. It was one of my favorite OSTs that I've listened to. I've got a CD around here somewhere of the Halo 2 OST. Really good stuff. You guys should listen to it if you're just a good music fan. It's really good stuff. But the Incubus and Breaking Benjamin stuff, as far as I know, I don't think they had the rights to use it with 343, who was in charge of making the Anniversary. And as it says, if you play the original game, it's part of the original game, but if you switch to the new graphics, the anniversary version of the game, it does change the music. And also, I think that a lot of the music from the anniversary is really, really good. I think that it fits tonally, and I would say, as much as I like, Blow Me Away and songs like that, I would say that the new ones sort of match the tone a bit better. But there was clearly an attempt to emulate sort of the feeling and the motifs and the the iconic aspect of what made the original soundtrack so good to this very day. The article goes on, Until Dawn's remake, released just 9 years after the original, included an entirely new soundtrack. I don't know anything about the soundtrack or what people think about it, so I'll have to recuse myself from making any judgments on it. Indie classic Cave Story has had its music remixed and recomposed twice in the last 20 years, and fans are split on their favorite version. Okay? I'm sure that you can remake or remaster old OSTs with new versions, and you can get a variety of responses in terms of how well you do it. Sure. But I think that Oblivion is one of those examples where the music is just too important to that classic feeling. And based on what we've been hearing from a lot of people, one of the reasons people tend to quite like the Oblivion remaster is because it gives them those sort of nostalgic feels, like they're playing an old game just with a bit of a new spin on it. But it definitely makes them feel like they are playing Oblivion. For me, at least, Oblivion Remastered is yet another entry on the list of problematic art I once loved. Ammo for the Eternal, separate the art from the artist debate alongside the likes of Neil Gaiman. So, to be clear, right, Jeremy Soule, the worst thing that he has been, as far as I know, proven to have done, and has done credibly, is a Kickstarter scam. But again, this article doesn't even talk about that. This article is referring specifically to the sexual misconduct allegations that were made against him. Which, by the way, to be clear, they might be true. They might not be true. But in our justice system, if you don't have any evidence for anything, I mean, you are innocent until proven guilty. And sometimes that means that, I mean, it is possible. It is possible that Jeremy Soule did those things, and they're terrible, horrible things, and maybe he will get away with them. But without any evidence, without anything to go by, what can I do other than say, well, there are a couple allegations about a guy who seemed to be kind of regarded as a jerk. I mean, is that enough in and of itself to completely remove incredibly iconic music from these games? And when it comes to music like this, I think that, and I think this happens with franchises of all kinds, at some point, I think that if a piece of music or an IP or a franchise, particularly franchises and IPs, they can become almost, not in a legal sense, but in a cultural sense, sort of their ownership becomes almost community driven, where the audience for something is so big and people feel so strongly or in a certain way about a thing that, yeah, they don't have the legal rights to use something or to change it, but these things need to be constructed with the audience in mind, as if the audience is a part of it, almost to where it's this quasi-collaborative sort of ownership of a thing. And I think that a lot of the times, we've seen time and time again, comic books and superheroes, things like Star Wars, things like Doctor Who, we've seen time and time again that when companies move away from a lot of the things that the audience clearly likes and has a connection to, it causes big rifts in that relationship of the rights holders and the canon makers, official canon makers, and the audience and their, attachment to those things. Especially the audience that kind of decides what succeeds or fails based off of how many tickets they buy and copies they purchase. If they would have re-released Oblivion, in this remaster, and it had a completely different soundtrack, people would be up in arms, and I wouldn't blame them. Especially if your goal is to immerse people into a particular experience, not just an Elder Scrolls experience, but specifically the Elder Scrolls Oblivion experience, which you can try and remake, and it wouldn't be impossible, but it would be, I think, pretty foolish to do. Not to say, not to say it would be impossible, but don't do it. Oblivion has sort of cemented itself in gaming culture as a particular experience, warts and all, and that's what makes it what it is. Oblivion is very much, especially after all this time where it's sort of settled and become cemented in culture as, it is no more or less what it is, more than many other things. Oblivion, jank, and triumph and all, is Oblivion. I don't know enough about the Neil Gaiman cases and allegations and stuff to weigh in on that. It's not actually that relevant here. But again, the Jeremy Soule allegations are just that. So far, they are only allegations. They've been that way for 6 whatever years. Nothing has come of it. There hasn't been any follow-up on anything. And what do you do with that? Do you say, oh, well, you were accused of doing these things without any evidence by 2 women, so we are going to completely strip all of your work from these games. And this is sort of where I think the difficult discussion really is. How bad does someone have to be before you decide to remove their work from public viewing, essentially to censor it, to hide it away? The Naked Gun movies feature Nordberg, a character who's played by O.J. Simpson. And recently, especially after rewatching some of those movies recently with, post O.J.'s demise, it is its own sort of awkward joke that he is in them. And I think even the Naked Gun remake with Leslie Nielsen. Sorry, not Leslie Nielsen. Sorry. Liam Neeson. Leslie Nielsen, Liam Neeson. Leslie Nielsen, Liam Neeson. Gosh, those names are really close. The remake where Liam Neeson is playing Leslie Nielsen's, kid or whatever. But the point being, let's say, for instance, that Jeremy Soule did do those things. Let's say he did sexually assault a woman, or rape a woman, right? Did something really terrible, legitimately terrible. Let's say he murdered someone, even worse, right? Does that mean that these incredibly iconic and very excellent works by this man should just be thrown away, tossed out, that they shouldn't be spread around, that they shouldn't be utilized for projects, that just no one gets to enjoy them anymore because of his actions that are completely unrelated to the artistic work he created? And I guess the modern culture's appreciation of those things, does he still have such incredibly powerful ownership of them that all of us are sort of morally obligated to drop them, to stop listening to them? I don't think so. Again, it's on a spectrum, and I think it's a fuzzy one, because it's a complicated issue. A lot of it has to do with the person, the viewer, right, the consumer of the experience, what your subjective perception of those things are in terms of its importance, and how much you think about the person who made those things when you consume those things themselves. With music, I find that oftentimes it's easy for us to separate the art from the artist, because music is often doesn't have a visual component in terms of like music videos and things. And often, especially when we talk about soundtracks, the soundtrack itself is far removed in many instances from the person who made it. It is tied very strongly, and often it's designed to do this, it's tied very strongly to the game or to the movie in which it appears. To the point where I think that even though most people would recognize Jeremy Soule's work in part, at least most people in these sorts of circles, they wouldn't know Jeremy Soule's name, and if I told them the name Jeremy Soule, they wouldn't know even that he's a composer. I mean, Bear McCreary would be another example, right? He did incredible work on the God of War Ragnarok soundtrack, and I wonder how many people could name him as the composer. But that music is very strongly and excellently tied to that game. And obviously, in a creative, basal sense, Jeremy Soule sort of owns that music and the fact that he's the creator of it. Not in a legal sense, right? But he is the creator of that thing. However, one does wonder, when does that shift happen? When does it feel like the thing no longer belongs to the person who made it, and it belongs to an experience like the playing of the game itself that it's made for, or it becomes sort of this shared cultural, I guess, meme in the classic sense, as in a shared sort of cultural or understood meaning, something mimetic. Sure, Jeremy Soule made it, but when I sit down and I play Oblivion, and I really have strongly tied, for obvious reasons, strongly tied the OST of Oblivion to the gameplay experience of Oblivion, I would say, where is it? It's gone. And I would be upset about that. I'd be kind of, I wouldn't want that. For me, the Oblivion soundtrack is part of that experience. And I would not want that to be taken away from me. Whatever immoral actions the creator of that piece may have done. I think that there is an element here of giving power to a person where they don't necessarily have it. I think once you make something and you send it out there for people to enjoy, when you make something and you put it out into the world as part of culture and you tie it to a game and then people have experiences with it, in a way it becomes theirs as well. Again, not in a legal sense or in terms of like real ownership. But maybe, yeah, I guess ownership in a sense. People feel like they own it, and not in a way that is entitled, but in a way that a large group of people, I think that the fact that these are communities, like the gaming community, I think that sort of exacerbates the sort of phenomenon. The Oblivion fan community, which I would say now has sort of has had big bleed over into the general gaming community, feels like, well, this is ours. This is our thing. We're fans of it. We enjoy it. We're enthusiastic about this IP and its lore and its imagery and its thematics. So it's kind of, in a way, ours. You get this with Star Wars too. Luke Skywalker, what he means to us. And, you know, the rebellion and the Empire and these stories, these cultural, modern myths, you could say, that, yes, we don't own legally, but in a way we feel like they are ours as a culture. Anyway, the article says, is debate even the right word? Yeah, I mean, it is obviously debate. He says, is debate even the right word? I think cop-out might be more appropriate. I think that is a very childish and juvenile way to look at it, as if all of these sorts of things are simply like it's just a solved issue. Oh, this person had allegations, therefore all of their iconic cultural work needs to be stripped away from its original source. And I don't think that's something that we should be down for. First off, again, there's just the basic innocent until proven guilty, right? But then there's the also, I think that you're giving the creators way too much power, or at least way too much, not power, power's not the right word. You're giving the creator of these things way too much external ownership or control, I would say. Yeah, you're giving them too much control over how these things can be used. The idea that this is just a simple, oh, it's just a cop-out. Well, no. I refuse to, again, let's say, that hypothetically, let's say that Jeremy Soule just was like found guilty of murder and he was sentenced to 40 years in prison or whatever, and there was video of it and it was just incontrovertible evidence, right, that he did provenly murder someone. That wouldn't change my stance on the music being in the Oblivion remaster. And that's worse than, you know, what he's being accused of. And I would still say, no, I think at this point, his contribution to culture is such that we shouldn't allow an action that he did, that he does in his life that is removed from the act of creation of that soundtrack to influence our decision on whether or not we can all enjoy it and we can have it as a part of that experience. I'm not going to give him that level of control. I'm not going to allow him to essentially make the decision for us. I'm not going to do it. And also, it's just, I don't think that it's related. It would be one thing to say that he loses the rights to it. It would be one thing to say that his contribution doesn't profit him in any way. That it's its own, you know, secondary aspect of it. But speaking otherwise, that's how I feel. Wes Fenlon continues with his article. As I get older and experience disappointment after disappointment with the actors and writers and filmmakers and musicians I once admired, continuing to engage with their creations feels more transparently a question of, do I enjoy this thing enough to ignore my moral view of the world for it? I think that by framing that question in this way is not an invalid way to interpret this, I guess, issue with art and artistry. But I think it goes to show the way that you look at it. I don't necessarily view this from a moral perspective, because I think that the morally bad things that a person does in one aspect of their life do not necessarily and should not necessarily taint the other things that they've done that are completely removed from that in every way. Let's take a look at a I don't know what example will come to your head, but let's say that there's a famous streamer or a YouTuber or whatever, and they make good content and good videos, and they're good entertainers, and they're insightful or funny or whatever it is, right? They're good for whatever reason. And then it comes out, oh, they have this weird fetish, right? They're into this one weird kink, or they engage in some leaks come out of some DMs that they've had with someone where they just do some silly cringe stuff, right? I think that would be an example of, well, that has nothing to do with them as a streamer. And it doesn't have anything to do with them morally either. It's just something that they do that people do. They're into some things, especially if those things aren't intended to be public or whatnot. And then people conflate that with the content that they make. Oh, yeah, this person might have made a really good stream, or, oh, they might have made a really good video that's insightful, funny, entertaining, meaningful, or just a good artistic expression. But there's this cringe thing that I know about them, and that ruins my ability to take them seriously. Like, sure, I guess you can feel that way, but I think that might be a small-scale version of being like, yeah, they're into some weird kink or whatever, but that's fine. They can be into something strange. That doesn't change, the quality of what they created in a completely different aspect of their lives. If there's no crossover, especially. I suppose in a way you could use me as an example. I'm into furry stuff. There's some weird stuff that I'm into, and that's just the way it is. And that's just me. I'm a person. I've got interests. And do I poke fun at that? Can I get a bit cheeky with some references to those things in videos and whatnot? Yeah, sure, but I would think that it's unfair to me to say, oh, I don't like some of the, let's say, furry art that you commission, because I'm a patron of the arts, so to speak. I would feel like it'd be unfair to me to say, bias and all, I recognize. I'd say it'd be unfair to me to say, oh, I'm not going to watch any of his videos or any of his content because I saw this one picture he commissioned where he's getting fucked on the beach or whatever. And maybe you disagree. Maybe you're unable to separate those things, in which case there's nothing I can really do about that. Other than say, I'm sorry you feel that way. But I try to hold this as a decently consistent for people when it comes to this sort of thing. We are getting a bit sidetracked, but I guess it's just an example, right? A low-tier, low-stakes example. No one's getting hurt. No one's getting raped or murdered or beaten up or assaulted. It's just a matter of, like, what if someone does something cringe, but they also do something over here that's way, that's really valuable, artistically valuable and meaningful. And I mean, to answer the question again, do I enjoy this thing enough to ignore my moral view of the world for it? There is an element of just Chad yesing that shit and saying, I enjoy this so much. It is an experience that is important to me. I'm not going to allow the bad thing that the person who made it, I'm not going to allow that to control its impact on me. I can say what that person did was bad, and also say they made some really good art. It's part of an experience that I value and has value for culture. And we should separate those two, and we should keep the good. And we should castigate the bad and punish the bad. And I'm not saying this is a flat rule all the time. The Cosby Show would be an example. How Cosby did all the stuff he did, and how all of his shows and everything were taken down. And I've watched The Cosby Show before. It's funny. It's good. Entire shows, essentially, flushed away, in a sense, because of something that one person in that show did. Even if it was the leading person and what he did was particularly terrible. I don't know how I feel exactly on it. I don't have a rule. I don't have just this blanket sort of process that I could use to determine every single example. A lot of it is feels, and a lot of it is me still figuring things out. I don't think anyone watching this right now, unless I guess you take the extreme position in either scenario, but I don't think that pretty much anyone watching this right now is going to say that they've figured out every example and they know where they stand on every single example of this happening. A lot of this is case by case and how we feel about it. And I don't think that that should necessarily, or almost certainly wouldn't necessarily weigh into like my moral sort of view on you as a person. These are complicated things. I don't think it's just as simple as cop out and that's that. Wes continues, judging by the enduring popularity of Harry Potter, the answer for many, many people is yes, depressingly often. Because I suppose Wes Fenlon thinks that, J.K. Rowling has a view of trans people or being a woman or whatever that I don't like. Therefore, the entirety of the cultural impact and the juggernaut that is Harry Potter as a franchise, again, as a cultural sort of force, that just goes away. Because why would you give her that kind of control over everything, especially as it morphs and grows past her? I don't know, but these people are, I think these people are just, I think they're weak. I don't care about Harry Potter. I don't really care about anything that she said. She's some writer who made some books and started this big franchise, and a lot of people love it. And I read the books as a kid, but like, I was like, okay, she can say whatever she wants. She can say whatever she wants. It's fine. Doesn't have anything to do with Harry Potter, right? Unless there's a very clear sort of message within the work that connects this view that she has outside of the work to the work itself. But then again, that's part of the conversation. That's part of why a lot of these discussions can be complicated. We see that a lot these days with, crazy Disney writers who are feminists or who are lefties or social justice whatevers, right? And they taint and corrupt this thing that they're making because of the political opinions and the cultural opinions that they have, and it makes her this odd link between the two. And sometimes the links that you have between real-world opinions and the thematics of a created work, let's take a simple example, George Lucas, when he made the original trilogy, his thoughts about heroism and the hero's journey and tyranny and rebellion and standing up to things, right? Those obviously are influenced by meta elements, which are his influences growing up and the things that he likes and the messages that he finds value in, right? But that's not unusual. That's pretty much all works. There's going to be that element of where the influences come from and where they go. But sometimes it feels artificial. Sometimes in works, especially again with modern Disney stuff in particular, you hear that phrase, you see the messaging in the film, and you go, oh, this is just a human writer preaching to me about some dumb shit. In which case, the ability to separate the art and the artist becomes essentially impossible, because they have purposefully intertwined themselves within one another. The article continues, but of course the question is rarely about just one person when it comes to games or movies. Hundreds of people put their love and sweat into them. Do their contributions make it okay to enjoy them? Or do they just make it easier to convince ourselves we're making a smaller moral compromise? This is a decent point that I think isn't worthy of dismissal, right? I don't like this person who made it, therefore, should I punish every single other person who worked on this project, which could be hundreds and hundreds of people, or maybe just a couple, because you don't like one of them? I don't know. I think it's a mix. I think it goes back to what the project is, what the message is, what the impact of the person, the creator in question's views on the world are. And I'm not going to say that I have the answer to this. It's a complicated affair. It's messy. And maybe that is sometimes just part of the sort of tragedy, is that, yeah, you might be innocent and you and all your coworkers might be innocent. You might have dozens or hundreds of people who did a good job on making something, a show, a movie, a game. But unfortunately, one particular person who was important enough in its development did something that was bad enough to warrant the whole thing being tainted by that association. I think that's definitely the case sometimes. And I think sometimes it's not. A director doing something really bad, that's not going to be nearly the same as one of the cameramen doing something really bad, and how that impacts the movie or the show, for instance. If Jeremy Soule was found guilty of murder or whatever, like, yeah, that would be way more important because he's the composer than having it come out that, oh, did you know that the second trombonist in the orchestra they used for this song, turns out they beat their wife? It's like, yeah, that's... I don't think anyone would say we should stop... We should not have the soundtrack in the game in that sense, even though the second trombonist, his stuff's going to be in the piece. His music is going to be in the soundtrack, and you can hear it. But he's so far kind of removed from the top spots and individual significance that it doesn't quite eclipse the barrier for most people. And I would say it'd be strange if it did. Though I guess that's a position you can have, really, if you're going to be much more of a purist on it. But that'll make it really difficult for you to enjoy a lot of stuff, and it's going to give a lot of people who do bad things a lot of control over the kinds of things that are allowed to be in our shared culture. And I don't think that's good. There's another way of looking at this choice. As comedian Alasdair Beckett King recently joked, a lot of people want to separate the art from the artist, but I would settle for separating the artist from her money. Okay. I mean, that would be a result, typically, of separating the art from the artist and choosing to not enjoy a thing as they would make less money. Does Soule get royalties from his work on Oblivion or from sales of Oblivion Remastered? I would say even if he does, I mean, like, so, in that sense, I would say even if he does get paid from it, it still is what it is. It's still an important part of Oblivion. It's part of the core experience. It's something that we want to see, we want to hear. So, maybe he makes a buck on it. And maybe, if we're going to be clear, maybe he deserves to, even if he did other bad things. If he, killed a school bus of children or whatever, does that mean that he no longer deserves to have the money from his soundtrack? It's like, well, I guess he still does, I suppose. Doing that, I don't think invalidates that sort of that contract, that financial contract he made with something else. Maybe it does. I actually don't know. I suppose even morally, I don't even know. I guess my default position is that they're separate, but I don't know. I guess I haven't really thought about it. Maybe it comes to the amount of money. Maybe it comes down to... I don't know. What about the sales of the soundtrack itself, which Bethesda has bundled with an art book for the $10 deluxe edition upgrade? I don't know. I guess all my commentary applies to this one as well. I wish I knew the answer to these questions, but Bethesda did not respond to a request for comment. Well, you're a PC gamer writer, so they probably think that you're an unhinged, lunatic, crazy person, so I suppose I can't blame them. More than 100 people were credited with making the original version of Oblivion, and many more for the remaster. The credits last for 24 minutes. I'm glad, by the way, not a great way to measure probably how many people work on it, is that the amount of time it takes for the credits to pan. Because there's font and the pan speed and columns. I'm glad we get to experience the passion they had for making an RPG that has some truly great quests in it, as well as some very silly stuff. But the soundtrack Bethesda is now selling as a standalone app, and that $10 upgrade, that only has one name on it, Jeremy Soule. There's nothing complicated about the choice there. I think that you saying that, Wes Fenlon, just tells all of us how simplistic your mind works, how unnuanced and obtuse you sort of see these kinds of issues. Because remember, to reiterate, Jeremy Soule was accused of doing some stuff. And there was no substantiation, no charges filed, no court stuff. There's no evidence that it actually happened. Depending on your stance that claims are evidence, but that's its own whole philosophical foray into madness. To Wes Fenlon, right? Oh, Jeremy Soule was accused of some things. Therefore, there is no question that buying the original soundtrack of this game that I enjoy, it should not be done on moral grounds. Let us hope, Wes Fenlon, that one day you are not accused of something, so that all of your work and everything that you created isn't simply censored from everything. That people now must take a strong moral position without complication. A set in stone, very clear stance that your work cannot be purchased. You can no longer make any money on your creations if you are accused of something. I have a feeling, Wes Fenlon, that if the shoe was on the other proverbial foot, you might suddenly find that actually, maybe this is a little bit complicated. Because when it's somebody else's reputation, when it's somebody else's money, well, it's your money, I suppose, it is just simple as can be when it's somebody else. Just an observation, though. There we go. That's the article. By the way, no comments on this one. It was the same thing with the, what was it? Andy Chalk article I covered a few videos ago on Dog Bites. The one about the body mod changes and the Bethesda mod, the Nexus mods thing. They, PC gamers, they're a bunch of cowards who employ a bunch of losers. And if there is a contentious article that they want to release where they clearly want to give a particular opinion, they will lock the comment section. They will not make it. You will not be able to comment on it. This is something they've done for a long time, to the point where it's quite conspicuous. It's one of the reasons that PC Gamer is not what I would call a credible or worthwhile news site, a news source. It is only good for mockery. It is only good for people like me to make fun of their writers and the terrible opinions and the awful articles that they make. They're not to be taken seriously. They're valueless in the discourse. Although I guess there's some value to be gained from a terrible example. There we go. That's how we turn a short article into a 40-plus minute video. But that shouldn't surprise anybody. I hope you enjoyed this little chit-chat about this article. I hope to do more of these. I'm trying to get some assets and stuff to where I can kind of make different kinds of thumbnails and things to help sort of sort and categorize these videos. Because it's hard for me to make long videos sometimes in terms of like keeping the momentum in it, even though there are videos that I am working on covering now that I have projects that are going through that are very long, and I do feel strongly about covering them, but they might take a while. So being able to do relatively shorter and simpler kinds of projects like these on Dog Bites is it's good. It lets me put some stuff out there for you guys. It keeps me sharp. It gets me to think better as I'm sort of talking off the top of my head. And a lot of these articles might have they might have some value in getting me to think about things, keeping me sharp potentially, introducing me to arguments that might challenge me. Because I think that this art from the artist discussion is a messy one. It is a complicated one. I don't think it is as simple as Wes Fenlon wants you to think. He has taken a very ideological sort of stance that I don't think he will be consistent on, because I don't think that, again, unless you are an extremist on either side of the position, you will not be purely consistent on. Or at least it's extremely difficult to be consistent on, because you're often comparing apples to oranges in these different cases. The Jeremy Soule stuff and the Neil Gaiman stuff and the J.K. Rowling stuff and all the other examples, they're all different. They're all weighted different in terms of what they made, what they did, and the connection between those two things and the implications of it. It's complicated. As I have said before, and as I will continue to say, beware the man who tells you that he has all of the answers. So, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will catch you guys later on. Toodaloo, be good. And, if you want to toss me anything on Patreon or Subscribestar, you'll get access to my my Discord. You're guaranteed access to the Discord if you pitch me anything over there. Even if it's $1, it really helps out. It all adds up. And if you have any suggestions of your own for content, there is a channel in the Discord for suggestions for content, and that's something I'd really like to utilize going forwards. So, see you later. Bye-bye. Toodaloo. Until we meet again.